Hey guys, how's it going? I just wanted to say welcome back. Thank you for being here. Um, this is going to be a great interview. This is someone that I've followed for many, many years. Someone who's done a lot of great work in this subject. So yeah, let's waste no time. I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Preston Dennett. Preston, how are you?
I'm doing great. Doing very well. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. I must say thank you so much for coming to talk with us today. It really does mean a lot. Like I'm just saying to everyone, I've been following you for quite a few years now, so it really is a pleasure and an honor to speak to you. So thank you.
Hey, much appreciated.
Okay, no problem. So let's just jump into it. I mean, like I said, I've been aware of you for a long time, but just going back and looking at all the things you've done in this subject over the years, it's mind-boggling. So why don't we just start right back at the start and just what got you into this subject?
I can tell you it wasn't voluntary. I was not looking for this. Kind of got dragged into it, kicking and screaming.
Wow.
Very skeptical. Did not believe in UFOs and did not want to hear about it. But I heard this report on the news about a sighting over Alaska. This was, boy, decades ago. November 17, 1986.
Wow.
And it's a pretty famous sighting now. I mean, it's very well known, very well documented. There was, it was a radar visual sighting, multiple witnesses, followed this captain of a Japanese commercial airliner for many miles. But the news report was very tongue-in-cheek, very much they kind of just joked about it, laughed nervously, and moved on. But I thought, this poor pilot, what an idiot. I mean, I don't mean to be rude, but that's what I thought. Yeah. That he's deluded. He's obviously misperceiving. Maybe he's even lying. But I thought, well, he's throwing his career away by going on TV and talking about this, which turned out to be true, by the way. But at any rate, it interested me that he would do this and that this was on the mainstream news. And I remembered my brother had seen a UFO, so he claimed. And that was 5 or 8 years earlier.
Wow.
I was maybe 13 years old or so, and I just didn't want to hear it. But now I'm like, okay, I approached him. I'm like, Mark, tell me about this UFO you think you saw. And he described an incredible sighting. I mean, it was a very close-up sighting of a metallic disc with colored lights on it. A dome on top. He had other witnesses with him. He chased it in his car. I'm like, wow, this, okay. And I mean, I knew he wasn't lying, and it was pretty clear he wasn't misperceiving. I mean, he was close to it.
Wow.
And I'm like, he says, you can talk to my friends, call Greg, call Phil. They were the other witnesses, and I did. And this kind of set the ball rolling. Found out that a lot of people I knew had really dramatic encounters. Not just.
What state was that in then?
This was in California.
Right. Okay.
Actually, not far from where I live now.
Okay.
Outside of LA. And found out, my sister-in-law had a sighting. She had 2 witnesses with her. I had a friend who had a sighting. She had another witness. Another friend who had missing time. He had another witness. So I'm like, wow, these people aren't alone. I always assume someone sees a UFO, that some uneducated person alone out in the country who doesn't know what they're talking about. But no, that wasn't it at all. I brought it up at work. That was a bad idea. Because all these people I'd worked with for years, these are people I loved and trusted and knew were intelligent people.
Yeah.
And they had seen UFOs too. I mean, one lady was chased home from the library by a UFO, her sister, and her mom, and they had missing time. She had no idea what missing time meant.
Yeah.
And by this point, I was starting to pick up books on this subject. So yeah, it hit home. It was in my family, my friends, my coworkers. That got me to buy books on the subject. I was going to disprove it. And I couldn't. I could not disprove it. It was the opposite. There was an enormous amount of evidence. I was a relative latecomer to this field. And it had been studied for decades. So I was hooked. Yeah, once you're in, it's hard to get out.
And where did it go from there, from when you were doing it for yourself and asking friends and colleagues? where was the first sort of initial jump and to the point where you were, let's say a fully fledged researcher that was, people were listening to you and looking to speak to you? Was there a particular time that happened?
Yeah, I would say it was about a year in. I was kind of just floating around, like trying to wrap my head around all this, buying books on it. I'd started to, I found UFO organizations.
Right.
I started joining them, attending UFO meetings. But I read this quote by J. Allen Hynek, who, if you know anything about UFOs, you know who J. Allen Hynek is.
Of course.
The Project Blue Book astronomer, which is, Blue Book is the Air Force UFO study project. And I heard a quote from him that kind of blew my mind. He said, 1 in 40 people have had an onboard UFO encounter. I thought, no, there's no way. That's way too many. You're out of your mind. I know 40 people. That would mean I know someone who's been abducted. And that's what really got me to ask everybody I knew.
Right.
And around that time, I had the opportunity to interview a lieutenant colonel because my father was in the movie business and was working on a science fiction TV series called Starman, which was based on the movie. And they had hired a consultant who was a lieutenant colonel who worked down the hallway from Project Blue Book.
Wow.
So that was my first interview. I was maybe, I wasn't that old. I'm early 20s.
Wow.
Let's see, 1986. That make me 21 years old when all this kind of came into my life. And yeah, he was my first interview.
Wow, that's starting off a high level.
Yeah. But then I started interviewing everybody. I became a field investigator for MUFON, took their test. MUFON's the Mutual UFO Network.
Yeah.
It was a hard test. Like, it's a take-home test. I'm like, oh, take-home? Well, that's going to be a breeze. No, wasn't a breeze.
Wow.
I mean, the UFO history part, I did breeze through that, but there was very in-depth questions on photography, astronomy, meteorology, these sort of things. So it was a good education, a good way to start. I was already...
Sorry, I was just going to say, do you know if that test is still around, or have they altered it since then?
Oh, no, you can still become a field investigator, but now you have to take classes. It's a little bit more involved.
Right.
But absolutely, I was very science-based moving into this subject. I was very skeptical. I mean, I know how far away the stars are. And that's what kind of made me think, no, there's just no way an alien race could get to Earth. The stars are far too far away. But this was all based on assumptions.
Yeah.
I wasn't actually doing science. So ironically, finding out UFOs were real made me very skeptical of all things. I had to completely readjust my worldview.
That's such a big thing to do as well, especially when you're sort of in your 20s and you already feel like you think you know how the world kind of works, and to have to readjust every belief system is shocking. Yeah.
I was not happy. I can tell you, I was really not happy about it.
So after you kind of got into MUFON and that, and you were doing field research, were you looking at local cases? Were you traveling? Like, what was the kind of next step for you?
Yeah, it really just started out with family, friends, and coworkers. And I'm like, wow, and that gave me 50 cases to work with.
Oh.
And so I started, doing formal interviews and visiting the sites where these cases had occurred. And that built up a network. So I soon had, friends of friends, friends of coworkers, and people just started coming at me from all directions because there wasn't a lot of places to go to back in the late. This field really exploded right when I got into it. There was So I kind of rode a wave of popularity. This is when Bud Hopkins' book Intruders came out. This is when Whitley Strieber's book Communion became a bestseller. The Billy Meyer case in Switzerland became popularized around that time.
Yeah.
So a lot of people were looking for answers, and kind of rode that wave into this field. And I started definitely really buckling down. I started writing articles at some point. I think my first article was for the local newspaper.
Right.
And he loved it, put it on the cover. I'm like, wow. And that's
Wow.
what.
So there was no skepticism from the local paper or anything like that. They actually put it on the front cover. I find that quite surprising, to be honest.
Yeah, I can tell you I was surprised, but I did my research. I recorded my interviews. I had the witnesses. This was in the town where I grew up, Topanga Canyon.
Right.
And I'd found a bunch of cases there. So I sent it off to the local newspaper thinking, this is an interesting article. And they loved it. And that's what kind of really got me writing articles. And my first really huge case that came at me was from the editor of the newspaper. There had been a bunch of people calling the police one evening. This was June 14th, 1992.
Right.
And a bunch of people called the police, a bunch of people called the newspaper. On this evening, UFOs were seen in large numbers over the canyon. This is in Southern California.
Yeah.
And he's like, please investigate it. I'm like, okay, I will. And that was still one of the biggest cases I've ever worked on. And that's what really got me writing articles for magazines and things. And I have to tell you, I put out a lot of books up to this point, but I was in this field for 10 years researching before I wrote my first book.
Wow.
So I did my homework for sure.
No, absolutely. I mean, I went through how many books have you written now? Because it's over 20, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pushing 30 right now. I think it's 28. It might be 29. I'm starting to lose count.
That's incredible. Yeah. And one of the books was specifically focusing on the Topanga Canyon area as well. So, I mean, to be able to write a whole book on just one small area of that, locally to you, that shows how much activity must have been going on.
Yeah. I sent that book out to 40 different publishers, by the way.
40
before I found a publisher who loved it, and turned out to be one of my most successful books. I mean, it did really well.
That's brilliant.
So back then, UFOs were not as popular as they are now.
Not at all.
Not as accepted.
No, not at all. So your first book, you're saying, was probably around 96, something like that.
That's right. Right. I'd started writing a few books. One was about the sightings and encounters of family, friends, and coworkers. That was the first one I actually wrote. But the first book I got published was UFO Healings.
Right.
And because I'd run into this lady who was having incredible encounters. I call her Wendy. That's not her real name. But she described these amazing experiences. She'd had a lot of them, and then told me that she had actually been healed by the ETs. And that really caught my interest because I knew of a few cases already. I mean, Jacques Vallée, famous French researcher, had a case of a guy in France who was cured of an axe wound on his foot.
Wow.
And partial paralysis. I knew another case about a Peruvian customs official who was cured of nearsightedness after being struck by a beam of light and rheumatism. I knew of a case in Texas, here in the USA, where a police officer was cured of a flesh wound on his finger, and actually a baby alligator had bit his finger, and he was struck by a beam of light and healed it. And then here's this lady, Wendy, describing how she had been taken by the ETs. She had been previously diagnosed with a cyst in her fallopian tubes. And it was MRI'd, X-rayed, fully documented. And the night before she was going to have an operation, to have it removed, she had an encounter, went to the doctor the next day, and they're like, well, this is really strange. They did pre-imaging before they do the operation, and they couldn't find her tumor, her cyst. And they said, you went to the doctor, and she denied it. And they said, well, no, we know you did, because your cyst is gone, and there's fluid here in your fallopian tube. This fluid is only present after someone has had surgery. We know you had surgery, and there are laser scars here on your abdomen. Wow. What happened? And she played dumb. She knew what happened. I'm like, why didn't you tell them? She says, are you kidding me? She says, I don't like those white coats that they put you on that tie your, I do know people who have been put in mental institutions, by the way, for going public, saying that they've seen aliens. Their family put them in a mental institution.
Wow.
So she was not about to talk. And yeah, the doctors were upset. They could not understand it. Because she'd completely denied. She hadn't gone to the doctor. I mean, she wasn't lying.
Yeah.
So that was what prompted me to write my first book. I'm like, let's look into the other healing cases. Is this a thing? Because I knew of another case in South America where a little girl was healed of cancer. I thought this would make a good article. And I found 30 cases. And then I found 40. I'm like, let's dig in. And I found over 100.
I mean, they must be really difficult to research, because once you've heard the testimony, and I suppose you get the medical records and stuff that kind of back up the testimony. But I mean, I've not really touched on that area of the subject much myself, but it really is fascinating that how do you disprove anything like that? I mean, did you find there was much pushback within the UFO community who may have been looking at we want to look at craft in the sky, we don't want to hear about these kind of more maybe fringe, especially at the time, sort of aspects of the phenomena?
Oh yeah, there absolutely was. This was the first book published on this subject, this aspect of UFOs. And at the time there was a lot of accounts of grays, gray abductions, and which I got involved in this field. I'm like, oh my God, people are getting abducted by gray aliens. They're being pulled on, kidnapped against their will. They're being experimented on. This is bad news for humanity. And that was getting a lot of publicity. I mean, there was a real strong fear slant on this subject. And then I kind of stumbled along these cases, which often were pushed to the fringe. Got very little mention. Finding information on this was not easy. Because people were not looking in. But the more I looked, I'm like, well, gosh, every major researcher has these cases. Pretty much everyone. John Mack, Bud Hopkins, David Jacobs, Barbara Lamb, Yvonne Smith, Edith Fiore. They all had them. I'm like, why isn't anyone talking about this?
Yeah.
And it was because, ETs are friendly and they heal people. Nobody wanted to hear that or couldn't even believe it. But I'm like, well, this is medical evidence. This is good, solid evidence you can actually get your hands on and touch.
Yeah.
So that's what really attracted me to it. And yeah.
So having those two angles for so many years, it was the fear and people were getting abducted, like kidnapped against their will. And then you started hearing about all these really positive things, healing aspects. Do you think they are all coming from one race? Do you think there are multiple races? Like we have a good and a bad in pretty much everything in this universe has a positive and a negative. Do you think we have that with the extraterrestrials?
Yeah, I think to a certain extent. And looking, being very objective about this, because I had to really step back and because we all have our belief systems.
Sure.
I had the advantage of having my belief systems completely shattered. So I was sort of, just floundering, trying to build a belief system.
Yeah.
And didn't really have one. So I came into this with a complete objective, skeptical viewpoint. I'm like, let's just look at this for what it is. Let's look at the facts. And what I found was a bell curve of behavior that falls under the same umbrella as human behavior.
Yeah.
But is honestly slanted towards the positive. Because humans are vicious, brutal beings.
Yes.
They lie, cheat, steal, murder, and worse.
Yeah. And I suppose you think if this is an advanced civilization that they've ironed out all that nonsense that we do as a human race. So maybe there's a few lingering aspects of the negative side of things, but I mean, that's how I kind of look at it. But it's still there, I think, because we still hear of abductions even in more recent times.
Some cases are very negative.
Yeah,
they are. People have terrifying, painful encounters, but it's rare compared to what I would say that. I mean, there's definitely a bell curve. Yeah, for sure. But most people the worst I hear, let me put it this way, is the physical examination.
Yeah.
Which is unpleasant sometimes, especially if it's being done by people you don't recognize, who look a little different. And we're taught to fear people that are different. That's kind of a big thing in society.
Definitely.
But that's it in terms of like, people are not being tortured. They're not being, the ETs are not sadists. They're not trying to hurt or scare people. That is not their agenda at all. In fact, what I found is they're healing people, is what they're actually doing during these physical examinations. And what I found is it's like going to the doctor. People don't like it. Talk to a nurse, and they will tell you how patients will kick and scream and call them all kinds of names. And this is sort of what we see at the worst aspect of it. But if you don't have a strong fear response, you're treated much differently. Your memory isn't wiped. You're not paralyzed. You're given freedom of movement. You're given a lot of information. You're taken to the engine room, the control room. You are given warnings, spiritual information. There's a very strong, pronounced spiritual aspect to these onboard UFO encounters that doesn't get a lot of attention.
No, not at all. Not near enough. And I mean, I think a lot of people are scared to touch on it because it really may be seen as just speculation. But, I think it's still good to talk about it. Even if, people think it may be nonsense. I think until we know what this is exactly proven, we have to leave everything on the table and consider all aspects. So, I completely see that point of view.
Yeah. When people got, when this field sort of broke out towards the mainstream, and it wasn't in mainstream, so there was a real strong aspect to just prove that it's real, it's real, and this kept people away from spiritual aspects of it because there was all very nuts and bolts. Let's prove this is real. But the proof is there. It's in the public arena. Look at the landing trace cases. Look at the medical evidence cases. Look at the electromagnetic effect cases, the radar visual cases, the implant removal cases. The proof is there. We've proven this.
Yeah, that's one aspect I wanted to touch on, is a lot of cases involving children who have no reason to lie, maybe not as much as adults anyway, but specifically the schoolyard encounters, which one of my favorite cases, the Ariel school case in Rua, Zimbabwe. We've got the Westall School in Australia. But I mean, I know you've written a book on school encounters. So are there other cases that are just as, or if not more prominent in what happened, that you'd be able to talk to us about?
Yeah, this shocked me. Having been in this field for decades, I had no idea that schoolyard UFO encounters was the thing. I mean, I knew about the Ariel encounter. I think it's the ultimate case of this kind, where UFO landed next to the playground, beings got out. Most of the people, the kids on the playground, saw this. No teachers did. But this was an amazing encounter. And I thought, wow, I have a case like this myself, where I interviewed a kid who was actually taken from a playground here in California.
Wow. And
I started thinking about it. I'm like, gosh, isn't there another case in Wales, like Broadhaven, Wales?
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, that was at an elementary school. UFO landed next to the playground, beings got out. And then I thought, gosh, I started looking, and another famous case popped up. Opelika, Florida, Crestview Elementary School.
I heard of that one.
Yeah, UFO landed next to the school. 200 kids saw it.
Wow.
And then I started digging deeper. I'm like, there's a very, very well-known case in Australia, Westall High School in Melbourne. Again, 200 to 300 kids saw this, as well as teachers, which was true for the Crestview case.
Wow.
I'm like, landed next to the school. I'm like, why are they always doing? They're landing next to the school in a grove of trees over and over again. So I'm like, let's look deeper. And I started, I've got a lot of books. I subscribed to the UFO news clipping service. I started digging through the files of MUFON, NUFORC, National UFO Reporting Center, APRO. There's a lot of information out there. And I got a real shock. This is absolutely a thing. UFOs are hovering over, well, not only hovering, landing. I found over 100 cases. The earliest case I found was like 1850 at Burritt College in Tennessee.
Wow.
But nothing really until 1950. But from 1950 onwards, every year, a school or two or more, I think there's probably a lot more, honestly, was being visited. These are not normal encounters. They come down, they target the schools specifically. And I say that because these objects will appear on the horizon, perhaps, or from up above and come swooping down and stop over the school or circle around it at low levels. These are low-leveled daytime sightings. And your average sighting is very brief. Not with these. These are long-lasting. I mean, 5 minutes is a long time to see a UFO.
Very long.
And that's on the short end here. These are more often 15 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, or over a period of days in several cases. And they're landing in 30% of these cases. Landings or humanoids are seen.
Do you have any theories as to why? Do you think it's specifically the children and maybe they're sending a message or getting in their heads at an early age? I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, I certainly thought about this. And what I found is some very interesting patterns. 50% of these cases, pretty much most of them, are elementary schools.
Right.
I mean, there's a very famous college case, Hillsdale College, which really broke this field wide open. Boy, the Air Force, this is what Hynek decided he was going to defect from Project Blue Book. He called it swamp gas. There was a huge kickback, and it was the low point of his career.
Yes.
This ended up causing a congressional investigation, this sighting at Hillsdale College, where it landed, by the way. People don't realize the UFO landed in front of this college. And yeah, I do have a theory. I think what is happening here is ETs are conducting what amounts to a publicity campaign. They are showing themselves off intentionally. We can pretty much easily conclude this judged on their behavior. It's very overt. It's very brazen.
Yeah.
It's very much in your face. Like, we are here. We are here. And I'm like, why? Why would they do that? You know, that's one thing to say, okay, they're showing themselves in an effort to announce their presence, but why are they announcing their presence? And I think it's to cause a sort of belief in UFOs, to let people know they're here for their other agenda, which is, this is pure speculation here.
Sure.
And I hate to speculate in this field, but you know, you can't help it.
You cannot help.
But I'd like to stick to the facts.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure that this is what they're doing. It's a publicity campaign because many UFO researchers have talked about how UFOs are putting on displays. And these are clear displays. And I think eventually what they want to do is open official contact. I think that's what this is. It's preparation. It's been effective. It's a very clever way to sort of introduce the presence of UFOs without, you know, causing front page newspaper headlines. Because, you know, kids, they're seen and not heard, sort of.
So maybe it's, I mean, again, throwing out theory and speculation, maybe they're approaching the kids, put it in their younger, more malleable subconscious for something that may occur 20, 30 years down the line when those kids are adults. Maybe that's when the reveal will happen.
Precisely.
Yeah, that makes, I mean, it does make sense. It really does.
I think that's exactly it. Because kids are so impressionable.
Yeah.
They're they don't discriminate. They don't fear something just because it's different. And in most of these cases, I mean, these are elementary kids.
Yeah.
They have not heard of UFOs. It's our primary, this is in primary school. You know, you haven't been exposed to these kind of ideas.
No.
And this is something they remember for the rest of their lives. That turns up in almost every case. So, like, I think about it every day. There's been no evidence of any hoaxes in these.
True.
And they've all stuck to their story.
Have you spoken to many of them, many of the kids from these cases in more recent years? Have you tracked any down in their older age and seen how?
Oh, yeah.
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 Any examples that you can give us? Just because, I mean, I think we've seen from the Ariel School kids from '94. I think in James Fox's The Phenomenon, he speaks to some of them. But it'd be interesting to see some of these more lesser known cases and if it all correlates as well.
Yeah, I would say that some of them have reunions. Because that happened with the Broadhaven school incident, that happened with the Rosieval school, which I think is also in Wales. But yeah, this is quite common. People are very deeply impressed. That's another pattern. Some become UFO researchers. That happened to Malcolm Robinson of Scotland. Wow. He had a playground sighting and ended up becoming, one of Scotland's major UFO researchers. I mean, he wrote UFOs over Scotland 1 and 2. And some become, quantum physicists or astronomers or very UFO activists. They join UFO organizations. So this absolutely does affect people for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, that they become truth seekers to look for the answers that they need from what they saw, I can imagine. So that makes sense to me. Now, Preston, one thing that really has been captivating me for the last couple of years is underwater, unidentified submersible objects, USOs, and specifically kind of the west coast of Catalina Island and, off the northern coast of Mexico. And again, you've written a book on like undersea bases, with over 70 plus USO cases. When did that really start for you? Is that something that goes back into the sort of 90s and that, or is that more recent? Like, when did that really come about for you?
It crept on me slowly. I will say that from the very beginning, I started getting cases.
Wow.
Because I am right next to the coast here.
Yeah.
And people started saying, oh, yeah, I saw this object on the water. I remember, I think one of my first cases was this therapist who was driving along the Pacific Coast Highway, which runs along the Santa Catalina Channel.
Yeah.
And she described seeing this light floating on the water. And it didn't look like a boat. And she turned to the guy who was driving. She says, look at that. And as soon as he turns and looks at it, it goes straight up.
Wow.
Takes off in a way that, nothing can do.
Yeah.
That was my first case. Started getting more after that. And it started stacking up. And I wrote a book called UFOs over California. And I thought, well, I've got like 30 cases. Let's do a chapter on this, ocean-going UFOs. And so that's how it started. And a TV producer actually picked up the book. And that's how I got onto the History Channel with their show, Deep Sea UFOs, which got record ratings. It was their best show, beat out Ice Road Truckers. and they were like, come back for a second show. I'm like, of course. And so that brought in a flood of cases, which led to another show and more research. Started getting asked to speak on it. I wrote an article for Fate magazine. They put it on the cover. That article went viral. Actually, it was posted all over the internet. And so I found myself being a USO researcher. And yeah, focusing on the Santa Catalina Channel. This is very close to the now famous Tic Tac incident.
Absolutely.
Which is on the south end of it all, but definitely as the UFO flies, or the USO. It's not far away. And this area of water, stretching on the north end from Santa Barbara south all the way down to really Mexico, but let's say San Clemente.
Yeah.
Is mile for mile probably the top producer of USO accounts in the world. I'm not going to say that for sure because because there are other areas which are pretty active.
Yeah.
But I've got 150 cases. And that's a lot. And I'm like, what is going on here? Because it's a pretty sharply defined area. Cases stretching back to the 1920s, all the way to present day. 2021, we've got cases.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Are these cases that you've researched and the public can read about, or is this still stuff you're working on behind the scenes?
I hear, I'm all over the place these days. I've got a lot on my plate. But yeah, what happened was Josh Gates' Expedition X television program called me up.
Yeah.
And so they were doing research into this area, and they actually caught it on film, and an object coming up out of the water. And I told him, like, this is the area to go to. Here's where you should go to. Catalina Island. It's the best lookout place. This is where I've got a huge cluster of cases. If you want to see one, I would go there. And I would look towards the mainland. And that's what they did. And it worked. And I know another organization, UAPX, is definitely researching this area. Capturing some amazing stuff.
Oh, well, that's interesting. I'm speaking to those guys next week, in fact. So, yeah, I'm very excited.
Awesome. Yeah. I'm telling you, I think there's a base there.
Really?
I really do, because I had a number of experiencers telling me this. I'm like, why would you say that? And they're like, I just intuitively feel it. One guy's like, well, I was in it.
Wow.
He was abducted from Catalina Island and wasn't taken inside a UFO. He was taken to an underground place with rock walls, and it was big. And that's not unique. I have, now 4 other cases like that.
Are we talking like a different base? Because we hear a lot of talk about the Malibu base. Is that different to what you're saying about possible Catalina base? Is it, is that different?
I'm not sure, to be honest, because what I did was my first step was to really sort of mark these all on a map. And I'm like, wow, they're all clustered here in the Santa Catalina Channel. It's very deep there, by the way. Average depth about 2,000 to 3,000 feet.
Wow.
But has canyons in there up to 5,000 feet deep, a mile deep. I talked to Navy guys. I talked to a submarine navigator, some really good witnesses. He had an encounter there. And I thought, there seem to be really clustered off the coast of Malibu here. If there's a base, it's probably right around here. And it was shortly after I had, put this out that these Google images started going viral.
Yes.
Of this anomaly, the Malibu anomaly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you look at it, it's like, wow, what is this? It's got a flat top. It's got what look like pillars or columns, a tunnel. There's some debunkers who are like, no, this is just an artifact from Google imaging. And if you look at it, yeah, some of it does look like a landslide, but others clearly show a tunnel. So there's a lot of cherry picking and shoe fitting, depending on which theory you're trying to promote.
Yeah.
But that's not my style. You look at all the evidence and then you come to a conclusion. So my assessment was already that there was a base in this area, just based on the number of reports, some involving not 10 or 20 objects. I mean, your average sighting has like 2 objects, right?
Right.
Some here have 10 or 20, 30. And I have a couple that have over 50. There are 3 cases involving over 100 objects coming up out of the water.
Wow.
So where are they coming from?
Absolutely.
So I started to have enough data points that pointed towards there being something down there. And that's when I started to, speculate on the possibility or probability of a base down there.
Yeah, I mean, there are people that are out. Sorry to interrupt. There are people out there that also speculate that if it's not a base, it could well be a portal that, is kind of an entrance point for them coming to this Earth, to us.
Or a tunnel from that Malibu anomaly does look like a tunnel.
Yeah,
and I have been told from people within the military-industrial complex, what I would call whistleblowers,
right,
who I've been in touch with for a while. At least one guy who I absolutely trust. I verified his employment. He worked on a Navy ship, had top secret clearance, and he's like, about the tunnels, right? And I'm like, well, tell me. And he said, because I had heard about them, and he said there was these tunnels that reach from, get this, Area 51 in Nevada to Edwards Air Force Base in the high desert of Southern California to the Santa Catalina Channel.
Wow.
So maybe, just maybe, that's where these objects are coming from. Could be a portal, could be a base. At the very least, there's a parking lot down there.
Sure. I mean, if this is the case and it's linked to things like Area 51 in with the tunnels, does that mean as the government are working with these extraterrestrials or interdimensionals or whatever they're called, or does it mean some of this, what we're seeing, is genuinely man-made, reverse engineered? Are you still working around multiple theories, or have you kind of pushed some aside and you're focusing on one?
There's no doubt, zero doubt in my mind, that some of the stuff we see is absolutely reverse engineered.
Right.
I have enough personal whistleblower accounts to convince me. And if you look at it from other researchers who've kind of specialized in that, evidence is extremely compelling.
Right.
And I've been told this over and over again, that some of the stuff we're seeing is ours. But most no. God, no. Because if you look at these accounts, and I've talked to a number of these military guys, they don't know what it is. And in this area, there's a good 10 to 20% of the cases, the objects are being chased by military jets. There is military in this area, but it's absolutely not our own for a number of reasons. Far too many of these objects, because if we do have these craft, we're not going to be flying around hundreds of them.
No.
And you're not going to chase cars down the street. And you're not going to put on displays for an audience. And you're not going to hover over someone's home, 15 feet above it and light up the entire interior.
Sure.
And you're not going to land and take them on board and have aliens be there. We know this is extraterrestrial, hands down, most of it. So that's my assessment. I mean, I'm not at the point where I can prove it, obviously.
No, of course, but it's good to, you've been doing this for a long time. A lot of what's being talked about that I've come across in this field at the moment is whether it's actually extraterrestrial or ultra terrestrial, whether it's, and there's all these new phrases, crypto terrestrial, something that's been here since way before we were here. I mean, do you subscribe to any of those possibilities, that it's not just a case that it's come across light years at light speed and things like that?
Well, I think it's clear some of these are extraterrestrials in the classic sense, because this is what I'll call them ETs just for convenience.
Yeah.
This is what they've said. They have told experiencers this. We are from Orion. We are from Andromeda, from Cygnus, the Pleiades, or we're from a place you don't know about yet. I like, ultra terrestrials, interdimensionals. The crypto terrestrials was an interesting idea.
Yeah.
Because we do know that these guys have been around probably longer than we have. And I think that's a safe assumption, just based on the fact that we've got Egyptian hieroglyphs that clearly show modern UFOs. We have petroglyphs. We have cave paintings. We have medieval wood carvings. I mean, this appears in ancient writings, the Vimyanas of ancient India. So we know this goes back far before recorded history.
Yeah.
And it might not be accurate to call some of these guys extraterrestrials, because they could be, a breakaway civilization. Yeah, we lived on Earth and now we're coming back. We cannot rule out that possibility. But the idea of extraterrestrials as a simple concept is inescapable.
Yeah.
It really is, because here we are on a planet. We know what we are. And to think that we're unique is unimaginable.
Absolutely. I mean, I think anybody that thinks that is kind of,
it's
looking through, like a narrow field.
And the fact is, people, when they see a UFO, it usually starts way up high and it's coming from outer space. And there are people who've been taken to other planets. I've heard this from firsthand experiencers, some very credible accounts.
Wow.
Like military witnesses have had this experience. So I can tell you for sure, fairly certainly, I should say, with a good amount of certainty, that many of these are extraterrestrials in the classic sense. And people talk about time travelers. I'm like, well, yeah, they can time travel. We've got good evidence of this. Interdimensionals. Well, yeah, they can travel interdimensionally. But everything on Earth is interdimensional. We are interdimensional beings. We truly are. If you look into this, there's ghostly phenomena, near-death experiences, astral travel.
Yeah.
other dimensions. Has been proven mathematically. Everything is interdimensional. So I'm not so sure it's useful to call these interdimensional beings. And really, if something can move interdimensionally or time travel, that does not preclude them from being extraterrestrial.
Sure.
And ultra-terrestrial, ultra-terrestrial is a vague concept. And I'm not, I mean, it has different meanings. What do you really mean by that? There is a theory that's pretty popular. I'd say this is the second most popular theory to explain the UFO phenomena. Extraterrestrial is by far the most popular.
Yeah.
And I think it's the one that best explains the evidence. It really does. From radar visual to landing trays to implant removals to the crash retrievals. I mean, we have the craft. Think this through. Look at it. If we have the craft in the bodies, we know what this is. I think it's not fair to call it a mystery.
Yeah.
But there is a school of thought in this field among people who are very well educated on this phenomena that this is a control system. You know, John Keel, Lauren Coleman, Jerome Clark, Jacques Vallée, a lot of researchers have put forth this idea that perhaps these aren't extraterrestrials, or at least some of them aren't, and that it's an intelligence that wears different masks and can manifest as, you know, ghosts, or what have you, spirits, or it's pretending to be extraterrestrials because that's a concept that we're, you know, at this point in our society. And I don't subscribe to it. I mean, I think that probably there's something to this because some encounters are very symbolic. Some encounters are so ungodly bizarre. I mean, they really are. That you think, could this be extraterrestrial? It doesn't make sense.
Right.
So I'm not going to completely rule that out. But it's a very anthropocentric theory, and that almost always falls by the wayside. We're not the center of the universe.
No, we're not.
So some of it is probably not what it appears to be.
Yeah, no, totally. So I thought for the last sort of 10 minutes or so, we just talk about the current climate of the kind of UFO subject and what we've had or seen in the last, you know, year or so with the UAP task force and the what I would consider a quite hyped up report that kind of turned into almost nothing. I won't say completely nothing, but how do you see the current climate of ufology and disclosure and things like that? And what would you like to see in the coming years?
Yeah, I see it as very volatile. I think this is something that can change on a dime.
Yeah.
I think that disclosure will happen. I really do. I don't think we should look to our governments to do it. Because just looking at this 9-page report, like 9 pages, really? This is a big subject, and you give us 9 pages of layered lies. It's pretty much the same story they've been singing for 80 years.
Yeah.
I'm of two minds about it. I kind of knew it was going to be a bust. I mean, I knew we weren't going to get a whole lot out of it.
Yeah.
And we didn't. And they said, oh, well, one's a balloon. You know, like, well, great. Thanks for telling us that. That's helpful. And it could be radar clutter, which in my mind is like, shut up. You know it's not. And they're like, well, could be a foreign government. I'm like, shut up. You know it's not that. I'm like, well, it could be US. I'm like, well, wait, aren't you the US? Don't you know what you're doing? And they left open the possibility as a footnote that this is extraterrestrials. You can almost hear them like pulling their hair out as they say that word.
Yeah.
They're being dragged into this kicking and screaming. It's pretty clear that the only reason they're doing it is not for our benefit. It's for their benefit because they need to disclose to keep any measure of control on this people's perception of this phenomenon. Because it's rolling out whether they want it to or not. That cover-up has been a good analogy is it's a dam, you know, and all the information is behind it, and it's sprung 1,000 holes, and they keep putting their fingers on it, and now the dam is collapsing. So this flood of information is sweeping over us, and they're like, okay, we have to deal with the flood, and that's the driving force behind disclosure. It's not because, oh, the people need to know. No, they are. And that's why they're studying, quote, sightings and not talking about Roswell or landings or people who have been taken on board or aliens. They're like, we're studying sightings, which has the least information to it. I was really hoping they would release materials, some good footage, and they're not doing that. I will not look to them for any truth on this subject. I think it's a mistake. But on the other hand, I think it will happen. Disclosure is going to happen because the cat's out of the bag. UFOs are not going away. They're going to put on a display that's absolutely incontrovertible evidence for the entire world at some point. If the Phoenix Lights had happened in today's age, or that wave over Belgium, there was a wave in France in 1954 that should have convinced the world.
Wow.
Every country has had their UFO wave, that an undeniable incident. And we're at that point now where the ETs, I think, are another driving force behind disclosure. It's going to happen. We're going to have open official contact. There's going to be full disclosure. I'm just not quite sure how it's going to roll out, but I cannot see it going any other way.
No, I mean, that excites me to hear it from someone who's been studying it for so long. That really does put me in a positive frame of mind.
Yeah, it's good news. UFOs are good news for us. Trust me, they really are. They're not here to take over. These guys are really advanced. They've been here for millennia. Think it through. If they wanted to take over, would we be here right now?
No, that's the thing. I mean, some people, I've heard people say, well, their time is different from our time. They could be waiting millennia just to make us think that they are, harmless. And then with that moment, they strike. But I mean, I don't subscribe to that. It's hard to believe. But for me personally, I like to keep a lot of things on the table. But speaking to people like yourself, it puts me in that positive frame of mind where you give a lot of good information and research and that. So yeah, thank you so much. That's all I can really say.
Hey, my pleasure. This is an important subject.
Yeah.
People may be skeptical. Well, much less now. Most people believe in it. People are like, oh, it doesn't really affect me. I'm like, well, yeah, it does. You just wait. Yeah. I mean, if we have this technology, if we have free energy, this could change the world. Just think of the healing technology they have. These guys are curing cancer. We have that technology, and it's being suppressed. It's a travesty.
Yeah,
this is a real crisis for humanity who is not getting the truth and absolutely deserve it.
Absolutely. I mean, I agree. Free energy could solve the climate issue, the fuel problem, the hunger, famine.
Exactly. That's exactly my point. The environmental crisis, the energy crisis, and the economic crisis, all of which are largely manufactured.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't need to be here.
No, they don't. Let's hope. I really hope that we get something in especially in our lifetime. But if not, for our children, I've got a young daughter, and I hope that she gets to see a better world. Possibly, we'll see. But
I'm very hopeful. I'm very hopeful. I think we're going to go through some rough times.
I think we have to come out brighter and stronger and more focused. I think that is what humans have done for generations, decades, millennia, in fact. So
we're in rough times right now. Hopefully it doesn't get too much worse, but I think we're going to have some rough times before people get tired of it. Like, let's come together. Let's stop the wars. Peace on earth. It's not hard.
I agree. And let's hope that happens, maybe with the help of some extraterrestrial friends. But listen, Preston, thank you so much for joining me. And I hope we can talk again in the future as this story just continues to develop. It's been an honor to speak to you. I appreciate everything you've been doing since I've been aware of this subject and yourself. And I know a lot of people watching live right now are really appreciative of your work as well. So thank you so much.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. Take care, and I'll speak soon.
All right.
Bye-bye. Guys, that was incredible. Thank you so much for everyone that joined me live. I hope you'll join me again, I think tomorrow. But I've got my premiere tomorrow night with Ross Coulthard. But guys, subscribe to the channel if you don't. Please give us a thumbs up, and I will see you later. Take care. Peace.